Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today I'm sharing a really fun and insightful conversation that I had with not one, not two, but three guests. In fact, the format of today's show is a little bit different. It's more of a roundtable discussion than a podcast interview. And the topic of conversation is procurement versus sales. And in the procurement corner, I was joined by my good friend Donna Donato, a procurement executive at companies like Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb, American Express, and now CEO of the Americas region at Chain IQ. And in the sales corner was Chris Donato, the founder and CEO of eSellus, alongside Megan Dimmer, the Chief Revenue Officer at eSellus. And eSellus is a revenue management company, and both Chris and Megan have had and continue to enjoy really successful sales careers. In this discussion, we wanted to explore procurement and sales alignment, and if there's any common ground where we can both support each other. We did cover these topics, but we also got into some really interesting debates about the tactics and strategies that sales and procurement often use to make life difficult for each other, and we also try and unpack each other's psyche. Now, I start the conversation with team procurement, asking Donna the question that I always try and pose. Did you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
Procurement what?
Yeah.
That was my first, question when I joined a company that said, we're going to place you in procurement as part of the management development rotational program. So it clearly found me. But then when I reflected back, to my childhood, I feel like I've been in procurement all my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of takes the skill of being resourceful and curious and finding out solutions. And Phil, as I grew up in Russia and a pretty supply scarce, situation. So securing basics like toilet paper and other, essentials was quite a part of the game. So I feel it found me without me being actually aware of it. And once I, entered the professional world, it really just solidified for me what a wonderful profession that is.
You already had those skills built up. It was probably
Right.
pretty easy from there, from what you had to do back earlier in your life.
That's assurance of supply, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
the first fundamentals, assurance of supply, and then we can move up to the higher level of, profession.
Well, we're doing something a little bit different today, so I'm really happy, as I mentioned in my introduction, to be joined by Megan and Chris. And so, Megan and Chris, you're both on the sales side, and so I'm going to flip the question that I usually ask. And Megan, I'm going to ask this to you first: did you find sales, or did sales find you?
It's an interesting question. Reality is, I found that I wanted to, in high school, buy clothing at a discount at my favorite store in the mall. So I went into the Limited, if anybody remembers the Limited.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And I got a job selling, and I was like, hey, everybody, I have a 30% off at the Limited. But the story actually changes here because I started getting the competitive edge of whoever can sell more, right, is going to make more money. And so I was really intensely focused on how am I going to succeed at this sales gig. And then I started spending time really trying to figure out who the buyer was, right? So who my client was. And there was a moment that is so memorable. There was a woman who came in. She was not happy with what she was wearing. She was not happy with her wardrobe. She had some things that she needed help with.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew everything in that store, like the back of my hand. I walked around, found things I thought would look good on her, handed them to her in the dressing room. She truly did not want to come out, right? And I said, listen, I'm here for you. And the more she tried on, the more happier she was, the more confident she was. And that feeling she had when I helped solve the problem, I was hooked. And it went from just the discount to sales found me, and I loved it.
That's I think it's probably a topic that we'll get onto later, is this idea of problem solving. and where that comes from a sales perspective. And because we want to dig into kind of the differences between procurement and sales, but also some of the similarities. And that's definitely one of the similarities. Chris, same question to you. How did you find yourself in sales?
I'm taking away from your introduction that procurement is child's play, just so you know, to start this off in Russia. So I found, I didn't know it was sales, maybe like Megan's story, but I grew up, middle class Catholic school kid. We never missed a chance to raise money or run a contest, and I loved it. I've been selling something, candy, magazines, you name it, since about third grade. And I was the youngest of three boys, and we'd go out in like a pack of kids to go sell stuff. And my brothers would be like, well, who's going to knock? And no one wanted to. Everyone was scared to. But I was the youngest kid, and I didn't want to disappoint people. I was the pleaser of the family. So I would go do it. And I'd knock on doors, and, that's where I learned it. And I later learned it was selling. And, I think because I was doing it to put uniforms on our backs or raise money for the church or the school, it made me feel like I was doing something good. And when I talk about sales with people, which hasn't somewhat of a negative reputation today, the first thing I talk about is the purpose behind it. Megan's hits on a really important purpose about solving problems. There's a lot of good we create. Well, there's a lot of good. We'll go into it later, but so it found me early, and I've been with the profession as it formally became known as sales ever since for my career.
So what we want to do today is we want to talk a little bit about procurement and sales, and ultimately how can we try and bridge the gap. Is there a gap in your experience, Chris? You've worked obviously with an awful lot of procurement organizations, so I'm interested to know kind of a salesperson's experience with working with procurement.
Yeah, it didn't the light bulb didn't go on for me really until I met Donna, who is my wife now 15 years, so we've been together for a while. And I remember hearing her talk about what it takes to be successful in her job. And she would describe it as one part of the being successful is having a strong relationship with sellers, with people, with suppliers. And I said, well, interestingly, because salespeople avoid you like the plague. So how are you
what
doing?
a disappointment.
Not you personally, although
maybe.
So and guys, that is a universal truth that you're not, the phone is not, the first phone call isn't to you in procurement. And it should be, maybe not the first, but it should be on the Rolodex. I want to have a relationship with procurement. So Phil, I would tell you that yes, just on the basis that we're not reaching out and trying to build relationships, which would probably requires a deep conversation. Why there's a gap based on what I believe is important for you to do. What I hear is important for you to do your job, which is have those relationships. Megan, would you agree or have a different point of view?
No, I agree with you. I feel as though everything you're selling and how you're selling it defines sort of the gap, right? And so, at least from my perspective, when I'm on the other side of the table or my teams are on the other side of the table, that the space between us will increase or decrease based on how much we're connecting with the actual need. So
yeah, but what are you guys afraid of? So you said like salespeople are avoiding, procurement. Let's just get maybe practical here. Like what is it that gets in the way that creates that hesitation moment, to engage procurement? Let's just put it on the table.
So for me, it's a good question. And from my perspective, Donna, it's the pain point is not with procurement. From my perspective, the need, as I described earlier to you guys, why I'm at Acellus, the need is not your need. The need is the buyer in in the function. And so if they know that they need what I'm selling and I'm only selling it to them because I know they need it to solve their problem, insert procurement who's really not concerned about that. In my experience, the concern is the price the right price? Are we getting the right terms? And so oftentimes that buyer that needs what I'm selling ends up getting something that they don't necessarily need or want because of the price war, because of whatever I just described. That's been my experience.
Our perception is that you're there to extract as much profit or get the lowest price, the stringent terms, whatever. That's our perception.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, when you're selling to an enterprise, you're going to have to. Buying is a team sport, so you're going to have to go through all different buyers, most of whom can say no, not many of them can say yes, and so if you observe a procurement person that is totally connected to the business problem, as Megan described, is thinking strategically, is thinking about how to connect the dots, you definitely will build a relationship. You'll see, because look, we're trying to help you, but we're trying to help ourselves at the same time. So part of it is, I'm not sure we see enough value in the work. We're not observing what that value on the front end, and then on the back end, it's like, it's you want to take control. I mean, like here's a ridiculous thing you guys do. You go into you're in a buying posture, and you say, okay, you can't talk to the business anymore. Mm-hmm. You have to, there's no more and salespeople start going, like we're walking on eggshells now, because you have created and you've hurt yourself in the process.
The times though that I feel like it's successful, and I will say that more oftentimes I've experienced what we're describing, but when we have the opportunity to break bread, when we actually have the opportunity to get the buyer in the function that we're selling to and procurement together, and we get to know each other and we have conversations where it's not just about the thing, and there's that relationship's built, and then there's the exchange about the need, and the procurement team sees that the function, that the group that we're selling to is actually like, I've looked at lots of things, as you know, this is the reason, and you start to really engage. That's when it's successful. And that you probably have too, Chris. I've had all of the above relationship wise. That's when it's successful.
That's magic. Yeah, absolutely. And everybody to the same table, aligning on objectives. And for us, for the procurement professionals, also kind of spotlighting, that you can move forward with confidence, both in the solution and the pricing and all kumbaya. But we are analytical too, right? So making decisions, on behalf of the company, or supporting the decisions on behalf of the company is important, from all aspects, Chris, as you said, right? Making sure we're mitigating the risk, right? I think I said before, we can hack into the enterprise, right? So not that the salespeople are hacks, but the perception sometimes is also for the sales side is that let me just kind of find my way into the sole source solution, right? That then limits enterprise by having a more complete picture and having the right decision points to make that right decision. So procurement then naturally inserts, themselves to make sure we help the business to make well-informed decision and mitigate the risk. So, but we don't talk enough about it, right? Because that risks your process, in terms of getting to the sale.
Well,
hence the gap.
Let me ask you this. You believe that having strong supplier relationships is important to do your job. I'll ask you and Phil, do you see procurement professionals proactively reaching out to suppliers to understand, to share business problems that you see and to understand capability proactively, so that you can build that rapport and relationship? Because information is power. You love it. You thrive on it.
Yes.
Are you guys doing that?
I would say yes. Strong. And Phil, you see much more across, like, so at Chain IQ, where we support multiple clients and we're like the pros, right? At this,
Yeah.
that's part of the core competency,
Yeah.
that we want to make sure that we have those strong relationships. We see the dynamic across multiple clients, multiple industries, and truly, I genuinely, if this is how you drive speed to value, also,
Yeah.
through those insights. But that's not uniform,
Yeah.
right? To many other, like Phil, you
Yeah, I would
maybe,
say like 25% yes, 75% no.
Yeah.
yes.
It depends on if a procurement um, individual or team is approaching the buying process as a process versus an outcome. Are
Yeah.
you trying to run somebody through a transaction, which is essentially running an RFP process and checking all the stage gates,
Yeah.
to get to an end state where you can claim some savings or some costs that were avoided? Or are you in a relationship with with the stakeholders as such where you're looking to help them drive a business outcome? And so, some of that will depend on what you're buying because, we have our matrices that say, okay, what are we buying? Is this business critical? Is this just a commodity and everything in between kind of on that continuum?
Mm.
If it's just a commodity, then we might look at that and say, well, why should we let anybody talk to anyone? Because all we want to do is buy these pens and they're the same from 5 different places. So I'm just going to run and get out of the way and let the market do its job and come up with the lowest price. Now, I can poke holes in that to say that everything can be strategic, but that's not
Mhm.
necessarily the way that we approach it. Whereas, if you're looking at the things that are business critical, big purchases, then you may find that procurement is playing more of a consultative role, probably because that's the only role that the business is going to allow them to play if it's something
Mhm.
that's really important.
Phil, you said you'd want to know how sales works. I mean, you can
Mhm.
observe it on one level. Let me explain what happens behind the scenes that is maybe not well known in the procurement world, and I think it could be valuable to know this. If let's even say you've taken something like a commodity and you're trying to get the best price, what happens in sale? A salesperson essentially takes a deal back to the ranch, to the company that they're selling for, and says, "Okay, we have a chance to win this piece of business. We have a chance to." And the more we know and the more we can advocate and the better we feel about the relationship, the more we're going to fight to give you the best price. If it's just cold and blind and we're not involved in the conversation because we don't want egg on our face, we don't want to fight hard and not win the business. We want to be able to tell a story that says to our company, there's a way into this new client and here it is, and I've got the trust of the buyer, and here's what they're saying to me, and I want to go and give them the lowest price I can that we can afford to do. We still want to run a good bit anyway, but so that's what we're doing. So if you're whether you're buying a commodity or something hugely complex and custom, the better relationship you have with the seller, the more likely you're going to get a better deal.
Mhm. So let me ask this to you, Megan. I think that the idea of personas is something that, as I've come on to ultimately from the procurement side to running my own business and the sales and the marketing side of that, personas is a big part of understanding who to target and what messages to bring to those people and how to work with them. Like, do you look at procurement professionals as personas to say, okay, this is a flag that I'm going to look for. And if they do this, that means, this is going to be a transaction and therefore the price is the price is the price, or
Mm.
they're actually going to take this action. And that means even though their spend may not be huge, I know this has got the potential to be a really good collaboration. And therefore I'm going to be a lot more aggressive on what I can offer. Like, do you look at procurement folks in that way?
Absolutely. So from a
So
persona,
there's a discount for good relationship. Can I ask for that? Is there a discount for good relationship?
right? It's a sort of looking for signals, right?
Mhm.
So it's in general interacting with a human, trying to determine if they are open or not to having a conversation and understanding really what we're trying to solve for, right? And so as we engage with procurement, I'll speak for myself and for sales teams that I've led and worked on. It's having the conversation and understanding and or doing the due diligence to find out who's worked with them in the past, and then having the conversation and saying, all right, this person isn't even listening to me. So there is absolutely 0 point in trying to have more of a conversation. And then you have to figure out, how can we posture? Because if this person is the only person that's going to be on the procurement side, then what are we going to do? Right. And so you have to have a strategy to deal with that persona. And I think you can take it from there, and that's sort of the worst case scenario. And from there, build out, okay, now if we have this type of persona, then you even think through, who do we bring in to engage with that person, right? Who's going to resonate with them? How, what is our strategy going to be? And think about, not only think about the question you asked and how I'm responding, right? So when there is a known need and there is a solution to solve for it, and it has been vetted with the business that it is the best solution, or so they're telling us, now we're up against a persona trying to sell them because they have their own process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, like, what are we doing that encourages you to look at a procurement professional as one where you want to work with to find the best solution, versus I'm just going to throw a price and see if it sticks, and I'll let the market decide if I need to reduce that price, based on, how a procurement person might come back to me in any negotiation.
So is the question, why am I not just throwing a price at a procurement person?
No, it's more like, because in my experience as well, now being on the selling side, the way that a buyer responds and reacts and communicates with you will determine the level of investment of time, one, that I'm willing to put into that, and two, what I'm willing to give to help them get what they need to get. And whereas on the procurement side, a lot of us are brought up, and I was brought up this way earlier in my career, to look at, I've got money to spend, so I've got power, so they should do whatever I want them to do. And obviously that's not the reality, but we brought up to think that that is the reality.
Yes. And it is kind of the mirage of power, right? And the leverage almost created that the procurement, might perceive them being themselves in control, right? But it's getting more complicated. So in order to really get to the right outcome and price. So, but I'm sorry to interrupt your question.
But I'll tell you, to answer the question, because it's observable behaviors that salespeople see from procurement people. I can tell you, if you remember the first call you made to me, and you said, and I was working with her CFO, the CFO, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, a strong relationship. And Donna called me and she said, how can I help? She didn't say, hey, like I want to, like she didn't get very analytical. And it was just like, hey, how can I help? I see what you're trying to do. And then, I learned later, she tricked me. She just wanted to know what I knew.
I was going to say, yes, I'm glad that worked, because my inner voice was saying, it's like, what is he doing? Like, why is he talking to the CFO?
Right.
And nobody in procurement organization knows what's going on. And apparently there's a big deal cooking, and we really should be in the mix to help shape it. So, but the way in was like, all right, this is not a battleground, for us kind of put our swords up, but really to figure out who knows what. And frankly, in return, you also said, hey, I'm also working very closely with your CIO, who you don't have a relationship with, and you might want to, and you might want to bridge that. So more information, actually being hungry for information, is healthy for both sides, and then sharing it, to build, that better relationship that could give you a discount at the end. So,
and I think you can tell when someone is what their their interest is it, and how they're approaching their job. And you do look for that strategic thinker, the person who's asked. It's about what the questions they're asking you can tell right away what their interest is. And everyone has personal interest, and you try to figure that out. How can I help this person, achieve their goals and maybe their career goal, whatever. So you kind of work together, and you can tell right away when someone's just, police versus the conductor of the orchestra.
Yeah, you're looking for, when Donna makes that call, you're probably either thinking, "Oh crap, I've been found out by procurement,"
Yeah.
or
Initially, I did.
or there's an advocate that can help me,
Right.
navigate
And of
the
course, you're
organization.
yellow flags.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Until you discover.
that's
And
the
that's
thing.
the persona, right? Are they an
Right.
advocate? Are they an influencer? What is
Mhm.
their role? And are they the buyer? Oh, they're acting as the buyer, but someone above them in procurement is actually gonna make the call. So it's really trying to figure out your position. And I personally will walk away if it's a pricing war. Like I
Mhm.
typically have worked in organizations where we're not the cheapest, least expensive offering,
Right.
right? And so if it becomes that, oftentimes it's like it's so obvious that's what this is that I'm not going to even engage because I
Mhm.
know I'm never going to get there. Right. And if the decision maker is going to be the person who's got the largest budget but wants to squeeze every penny out of the deal, I'm out. And so that's where I think my rub has always been, right? And it's like I'm going to drop the mic and walk away at that point versus having the engagement, right, with the buyer.
I think I was just picking something actually on this topic, and then Phil, you mentioned something about outcomes, right? Because I mean, for me also now being on the sales side, right, of the procurement service, but we focus on outcome versus the price so much more, and doing all of the homework on the buyer personas, motivations, all of that, which I think actually procurement in house should be doing more of
Right.
as well.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's by the way is I think is somewhat of a training gap between sales that does go into much more of kind of that EQ map and motivation, the case for
Mm-hmm.
change, etc. Where I was going was that was Megan, you said that you kind of yellow light appears when procurement talks about pricing, but it's interesting, you probably sell though on outcomes, right? Because you're not the lowest cost solution. So when you have the conversation with the business, it outcomes. So that's a gap right there. We're talking about different things, but like apples and oranges mixed in the same bag, and we're talking past each other then. So the more we could help, and I think that's responsibility on both sides to drive the conversation to what success looks like, you know, ultimately for the business, but it has to show up in some material, quantifiable ways because procurement will be measured by the ROI, of their function, by the value they bring to the enterprise. So the more sales can help us articulate that, the more I think we could bridge that gap.
Donna, do you think that we struggle with the idea of value-based pricing? Because that's one of the things
Yes.
that comes to mind is, when you're selling outcomes, you're really pricing based on value. Whereas
Yeah.
procurement, oftentimes we think about pricing in terms of cost and cost drivers. And I wonder if that's where some of the disconnect sometimes is we can't get over the fact that something may cost, $500,000 when we know the input cost is 50 grand.
Yeah.
Because we're always trying to reduce the price to be more in line with the input cost.
Yeah. I think that what you're pointing to is the problem with the measure, right?
Mhm.
Kind of the KPIs of success for the function. Measuring impact, right? And kind of the basics, P times Q is simple, but is so outdated and not, and not impactful these days. The savings methodologies, I think, have been in every organization, defined, evolved, but they still have, a huge chunk of it is a pure cost reduction. How did I do against my previous cost in the baseline? The outcomes-based pricing is, I think, by far more sophisticated, more critical, but it's also not simple. And I think we sometimes shy away from complex.
Yeah.
What's your role
Yeah.
if you do structure a deal like that? What is procurement's role in making sure savings are achieved or outcomes are delivered? Do you guys play a role across the life cycle of the deal, so to speak, or the delivery?
Um, I would say it depends, right? For the large strategic deals, you want to make sure, right? The value gets lost kind of from just basic neglect,
All the
right?
time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
So part of, of a procurement good procurement organization do is put together the right governance that measures those
Yeah.
outcomes and ensures, like, there has to be business accountability, obviously, for the success of the deal, but procurement is there to guide through, the right we call SRM, supply relationship management program, that, the key, what's intended by the, by the deal is actually achieved. And you can't spread yourself over, like, we have thousands of deals for, any given organization,
right.
but for the large ones, that are critical, I think it's imperative, and good procurement organizations do that.
Yeah. And sometimes procurement folks will it depends on how involved they are, because some, that are more, well, not even the ones that are more transactional, but sometimes it's just we've got so many deals that are going, as you'll get to the point of contract, you hand over the contract to the business and the stakeholder, and then it's like, okay, I'll see you in 2.5 years when the deal comes back up again. And that's where procurement doesn't have any real involvement in actually all the savings that they claim is based on conjecture and forecast, not reality.
I guess my question would be, Donna, from your perspective, so if we're going to have QBRs, right, with the business, and there are certain metrics that are important from your perspective, from a return on investment, from a value perspective, from an outcomes perspective, then do you typically ask to participate or have the deliverables to make sure that they're measuring where they need to be, and from the QBR? What does that look like?
Again, there's the range, I would say, right, of maturity. If the organization is at a place where those QBRs are well defined, procurement is involved, then yes, somebody should be at the table making sure that we're not just talking, kind of BAU KPIs and, kind of where we are, but actually looking back, not just to what was, again, the intent of the deal for this, outcome, but how things are evolving. What are some new variables, that might have been introduced? What has contract anticipated that? Are we dealing with something unprecedented that we should really kind of take care of, at the right time? But it doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen, I think, even for some of the bigger deals that fail, and then people grow frustrated. They make judgment and conjunctures about, it's supplier's fault, because it's easier to point fingers to, and they don't deliver. And, we forget kind of why we got into this deal to begin with.
I mean, guys, I've structured, as deals, billions of dollars of deals across, the world, and big companies. We never see you after that. Mm-hmm. And that is a missed opportunity because the buyer, it's a big missed opportunity for everyone.
Yeah.
Because,
the opportunity for us. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, Donna.
One thing, being now myself kind of on the sales side, running, kind of in the role that I am, we look at QBRs as a supplier as like, this is really important.
Yeah.
It's an important conversation to have, So I think for procurement folks, it's good, again, note to say, like, hey, the supplier is motivated to do this right, so tap into that energy to make sure that you don't grow apart. It's like a relationship in marriage, right? You could grow apart from neglect, misalignment, not fixing the issues as they are, and then you're bust.
I think about that, and I heard you say, neglect is the number one reason, and I think about in our seat, right, from a sales perspective, I should want, although it may be painful to have you involved, just kidding, but right, I should want you to be involved or to be aware that I am, in fact, achieving what I said I would, because this contract is going to expire. And it's not automatically going to renew.
So on a scoreboard, yes.
But do you, as much as we say procurement folks should get involved in that, do sales say, okay, I've done the deal, I've got my commission, I'm going to come back in 2.5 years when the deal's up and see if I can, do you do the same as we do?
We don't see sales. Wait. I want to pause on that point, because I know we pounced on procurement here, but the perception of sales is, I signed the deal and I'm out of here. I don't live with the consequence, right? And I'm really exaggerating probably the point, but it is a perception. So to what extent do salespeople really get involved in making sure that there is a success at the end of the deal?
This conversation, frankly, is such a good one, in that my wheels are turning and I'm taking notes, and I'm like, why wouldn't I invite you to the QBR? Why wouldn't I want you to be aware? Why don't I want to continue to have a relationship with you? Because of what we talked about, but it's a stigma on both sides, right? Maybe not always, but if we do start to engage and we do pull you in, because it's not that a good salesperson is involved, stays involved, continues the relationship, ends up oftentimes being friends with the organization they're doing business with. So why do we all leave the sales organizations we're at, go somewhere else, and our clients follow us? Not because we took them out for a drink, closed the deal, and lived happy on the hog, if you will, because we made some commission check. It is a relationship. But if we were more strategic in who we had relationships with and helped you to know that the decision you made was a good one, that relationship could be longer as well.
We do, to your question about does sales stay, sales is evolving rapidly, we believe. And what might look like, I mean, the kind of like traditional role of salesperson shows up to sell the deal and then goes away, it's changing. There are different roles that have sales responsibility. It may not be the same person that is actually representing sales, if you will. Selling has become a team sport. You've seen, the days of buying a big, massive SAP implementation they've gone away. People buy this stuff in smaller bites. So you're much more committed to the outcome because you want them to keep buying other bites, which is, customer success is somewhat of a masking the fact that we want to sell. Now, let me say, when I say we want to sell more, we want to solve more problems. We want to solution more. We want to serve you better. They're all sales attributes under the umbrella of sales. So yes, you're going to see, different roles showing up, and we are with the deal. We don't just walk away, but it doesn't look like the traditional way of selling. Does that make sense?
It does, but the reality is, and I think you worked on a special project actually to redefine sales for one of the largest companies, right, in the world, actually, because the problem was they sell one big deal, they go away. Then the new person comes in 3 years later, there's no continuity, right? Because a good salesperson that closes a large deal is needed somewhere else, right? And the reality is that, there is actually it is a problem that I think is fundamental to sales in those relationships.
We screw it up with comp. This is a big problem for us. You will incent set people, like comp changes every year for us, for almost every company, and that we tweak it. But you'll see whatever the goal is of the company, the comp adjusts. And often you'll see, okay, we're not paying you for renewals the same way we're paying you for new logos. So then that creates a dynamic. Or we're paying you for TCV instead of paying you for revenue. And that changes because then we want bigger deals. Anyway. So yes, comp is a big factor that influences how we show up.
I think that creates then mistrust. Back to the perception is that we look at you as kind of sign and dash, out of here, and don't live with the consequences. But the procurement folks live on the inside with the decision that they had to support and defend, So it's, I don't know how to address, but it's out. Yeah.
And the interesting thing from a procurement perspective is once a deal is in place, we have very little desire to go and change the supplier when the deal is up in 3 years' time or 5 years' time or 2 years' time or whatever it is. It's only in these extreme cases where something has failed, and the deal wasn't fit for purpose or the needs changed and nobody did the QBRs to try and put things back on track, that you find yourself where you're going to go and renegotiate. So procurement wants to come to the deal, to do an easy negotiation with the incumbent, to get a bit more value, and then move on to the next thing. Like, we don't want to go through a whole RFP process when the deal's up.
Do you really? Well, what if you left an organization and you wanted to make a name for yourself and you had relationships and you come into a new organization? Do you still want to stick with that old supplier?
No.
Right.
Or should I say, you want to use the market. You're going to be much more aggressive in terms of, I want to show that there's a better way. But when you're in a category where you're, in that category for some time, you don't really want to upset the apple cart. One of the challenges for procurement that you probably see is oftentimes we're generalists, a lot of us. I was a generalist. And so we're farmed across different categories because that's what we want. That's where our interest lies, in buying new things all the time. And so you get into one category and you're in one category for 18 months or 2 years. Then you go to the next one, then you got the next one. So we're coming to every one of those categories with a short-term view. And the short-term view is, how can I get as much money out of that category as I possibly can to show how good I am? And then you move on to the next one and the next one. And the person that comes in after you is like, there's no more money to take. So it probably looks bad on them coming into a category where you've taken all the value or the money off the table. And that's a lot of how the churn in procurement, I think, impacts short-term decision making.
It is interesting you said this about you don't want to upset the apple cart or change, because we are often on the receiving end of a RFP when we're not proactive, but we're receiving something from you, and there is an incumbent. And I talk to sales teams all the time. I mean, the incumbent has an extraordinary advantage, as you just described. Yet we often hear from procurement, hey, we're seriously looking around. We are evaluating our options. And I'm not saying that that's nefarious intent. It might be good intent, but we've seen it enough to know changing a supplier is so hard. I don't know that anyone has solved for this. How do you get the best from the supply when the suppliers know, okay, you're the likelihood of you changing is low, but you're open. We've played with different ideas through the years of, letting the new suppliers actually have a time when the incumbent's not involved, for example, in the process. I don't know. There's not a good answer, but it's an interesting discussion.
Cause sometimes it's real. I mean, we really do want to go and change.
Want to,
and a lot of times that'll be either stakeholder driven, or it's, collectively we've decided this is the best strategy for this thing that we're buying, and that's what our decision is. I know other times it's, the facade of, we need to create a competitive marketplace to understand that we're getting the best that we can from the incumbent, so that we're not seen as it being like a dereliction of duty by just signing whatever they put in front of us to extend.
We feel that though, right? So so we know if we didn't influence the RFP, it was written by the incumbent. Oftentimes we walk in to, thanks for inviting me to present, but the entire floor is employees of the incumbent. And you're like, yeah, there's no chance. How are you going to unhook half of your staff? Right. So it becomes one of those, like, I know why I'm here and I'm doing it because the more of these I do, the more likely I am to succeed. But it's an interesting seat to sit in,
Now, do you find that you approach whether it's an RFP or whether it's just a discussion with a prospect, or even with somebody who you're doing business with already, do you approach that procurement person differently if they're a generalist? So like what I talked about before, that I was somebody who understands the procurement process but doesn't necessarily understand the nuts and bolts of what it is that you're selling, versus somebody who is a 10, 20-year professional in buying exactly what it is that you're selling and knows it inside out. Like, do you have a different approach based on those two personas?
Yes, because a generalist sometimes needs me. A generalist doesn't understand. And sometimes the younger, the better, right? Because you almost they feel like you're mentoring them and you're helping them sort of educate them on the category, on whatever you're selling. And sometimes you can crawl inside of their brain and you can really truly influence. If it's someone who has been in the category for a number of years, like you said, my experience has always been, they think they know more than me and they do have the money. And so it's more of oh, I'm sorry, you already know this. So now it really does come down to specific things. You're driving the conversation at that point. Yes. So that would be what do you think, Chris?
I loved what you said, because I would say that would be my immediate reaction. And then I think about a little more about the real examples. And look, I think the person is the X factor here. The person who is curious, that you run into people who are experts in the category. Many are like Megan described, and it's obvious I'm the expert, and they don't trust the person, selling on the other side. And so it can spiral in a bad way. But there are the consummate professional expert that's like, what's new? I want to change things. We've been doing things 20 years this way, and I want to find a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there are those, I call it an entrepreneurial buyer. The entrepreneurial buyer sees the risk of staying the same is greater than the risk of change. So they're willing to go on this journey and they're willing to change. So you do look for those attributes in somebody, and they can be in any job. It's a mindset thing. But the rule of thumb is, I agree with you, Megan, kind of what we generally see.
Well, but then from that point, right? So let's say it is someone that can be influenced or is curious and willing to listen.
Yeah.
You still need to, from my experience, you got to get everybody in the same room who's actually making the decision. And that's the art.
Magic.
That is the art.
Because influence somebody, you said earlier in the career, but if they have no influence, on anything, then it's great. But until they, progress a little bit further, was there?
By the way, sometimes, so Megan, I would argue you are absolutely getting, part of our job is, to curate this experience and to get people, together, because often clients often sit in their silos. So there is benefit of bringing together. However, I see this more now than ever. It takes one person to kill a deal. It takes one person to be negative, because people are afraid to buy today. It was 20, 15, 10 years ago, you could find an executive who's like, we're going to do this. And they marshal the organization. Today, buying has become so democratic. It's like, it takes one naysayer. So sometimes bringing people together when you have a naysayer can be a negative, because that's all it takes. There's many more people that can say no today, which is really an interesting buying dynamic that we've had to get used to.
But I'd rather the naysayer say it in front of my face than behind my back.
Well, but they don't. That's the thing. They kill you in the background. This is
you might not have the opportunity.
You don't have the opportunity, and if they're sharp, because look, at the end of the day, it's a resistance to change. I don't want to do something different because it creates more. It's usually the person that's going to do the work and has done something already. And it's, again, it's not their fault. Change is hard. Anyway.
Well, I know that it's coming up on time, and feel like I've only scratched the surface as well. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think that we should look at doing something again. Get some questions in from the audience as well. I think there's a lot to uncover that we didn't even get a chance to go into today. So Megan, Donna, Chris, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the pod today. And what I'll do is I'll include links to all of you and your LinkedIn profiles in the show notes for today's episode. So that's going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.